It was January of 1993. I met her in the middle of my sophomore year of college. I was 19. She was 21. She was just sitting in the TV lounge the first night that I moved in, and I introduced myself. And within a few weeks, I worked up the courage to ask her out. She said yes. And before too long, we were this couple. And after a short while, we became one of the better known ones in our dorm. Like that kind of couple, young couple, when you're 19, 21, other people look at and kind of wish they were you. And I really liked that idea that we were making other people jealous in how close we'd become and how quickly we'd gotten that way. One of the things, if you don't know about a relationship when you're living in an environment like that in a college dorm, is that everything is in really close proximity. She was 2 flights up from me. We were together almost all the time. We had breakfast and dinner together, lunch in between our classes. If we could, we would spend hours in her room or mine. We'd leave these sticky notes on each other's doors. That sort of constant and close proximity to each other really kind of intensified everything. It was the closest thing to like living with somebody without actually living with them. And by the end of the year, the end of the academic year, I felt really closer to her than I had ever felt to anybody in my life. When the school year ended, we took this road trip up to Portland for, I think it was the third Lollapalooza. And on the trip back, we cried because we were going to be going our separate ways for the rest of the summer. Each of us going back to live under the roof of our parents, as you do in college. And for me, that was Ashland in Southern Oregon. And for her, it was Gold Beach on the Oregon coast. That's about a 3.5 hour drive away from each other. And that's really not very far. But in that time, 1993, it felt like a lot because that was a very analog age when you look back, pre-internet, pre-Facebook, pre-AOL chat. Staying in touch then meant either long distance phone calls or letters. And a call from Ashland to Gold Beach on our parents' dime was long distance. It wasn't cheap. So we didn't really call each other that often. Instead, we started writing to each other a lot. These very sweet, gushing, loving letters about missing each other, longing for each other, and really starting to write about like a long future together, even though we were so young. 2, 3 letters a week. And like I said, even though it wasn't that long of a drive, we only saw each other once over that summer when she visited me for my 20th birthday in the middle of summer. And the rest of the time, we were both working a lot. I was delivering pizzas, doing these other odd jobs. She was working over at the coast, each of us putting in our full-time hours, rebuilding bank accounts, getting ready for the next year of school, putting a lot of money aside. And for me, I set that money aside, and then my father, who was an elk, like the Elks, one of his elk brothers owned a jewelry store. And he gave me a friends and family discount on an engagement ring. It was like $500, about as cheap as you can spend. But again, I was 20 years old. At the end of the summer, I drove to Gold Beach to help her move back to campus, and I asked her parents for their blessing in asking their daughter to marry me. And they weren't terribly shocked, just as they weren't like terribly psyched, but they said that they thought I was a good young man and they approved. And I had this grand idea, like that I was going to throw a party at the new house that I was moving into off campus, and we'd get all of our friends together, and then I would do this grand proposal. But I was 20 years old and I was really impulsive, and I had this ring in my dresser, and I literally proposed to her the next day. That was fall of 1993. So fast forward to 2008, 15 years later. She and I were packing up our house to move from Corvallis to Portland, and we found a box with all the letters from that summer in it. And so we stopped packing and took a break from everything else we were doing and just sat on our upstairs bedroom floor reading them out loud to each other. Her letters were written on red or pink paper, and the envelopes that had them had all these drawings of hearts and stickers. And then my letters were these sort of long run-on prose, like kind of poetry that was equal parts Bon Jovi and Pearl Jam, kind of straddling the two sides of my young life. And really it was all so full of sap that I half expected syrup to like come out of the envelopes, but instead all these paper hearts that she put in them just fell all over the bedroom floor. And we read them and we marveled at how our two sons, we had two kids by then, that should they ever be apart from somebody they love, wouldn't have to experience so many of the things that we had. They didn't know and would never know what the hell a long distance calling plan is. They'd have text and chat and they'd have video calls. So, 3.5 hours of distance now would never feel for them like it was for us way back not that long ago. And we kind of sat there in awe of how many things had changed, our tools and our technology. And we talked about how the kids would never go through something like that. What we didn't talk about was the people in those letters, because the way that they read, it might as well have been like long lost writings that we'd found in a storage space or an attic of that house, left behind by previous owners, like total strangers to us. Because if it wasn't for the actual names that were in those letters, there wasn't much that we could match up to anymore. We read them, we laughed at ourselves, but we never once asked each other, how come you don't write to me like that anymore? Or where did those two people go? Or when was the last time you or I found a sticky note on the bathroom mirror saying, I love you, instead of a reminder about picking up one of the kids or grabbing something from the store? It was a lot easier to just look back in time and take a look at everything external, all that technology, all the things that had changed. We never talked about how we had changed. I think of that box full of letters and I laugh at how big of a deal we made about that time and the miles apart and not seeing each other for weeks and weeks, about distance and what it really means. Because Ashland, Oregon to Gold Beach, Oregon was nothing. It wasn't then, it's not now. And that particular afternoon, it could have been Ashland, Oregon to Asheville, North Carolina, or Gold Beach, Oregon to the Gold Coast of Australia, and it would still be nothing. Because there's no amount of miles or time and space that could ever feel as far as the distance that I felt that afternoon with her in the same room with this person I loved, but that I was just beginning to realize for the first time of what would be many more times to come had grown really, really far from me. And as it turned out, there are some distances that you'll never bridge.